Our journey begins. It is day 123, October 1st, 2024. And I'm out here in the very early morning. The stars are not visible because of the cloud cover, but the weather, the breeze is beautiful. It's starting to smell like fall. And I sometimes it's good to occasionally just take a step back, reevaluate, reconsider, especially as you're going through big projects. And occasionally it's nice to get a good overview, see where you've been, make sure that you're still going on the right path. um like it's it would seem like we kind of assume that our brains are capable of just going one day after the other in the right direction. But a lot of times, a lot of the big part of things is just staying on the right trail, like reorienting ourselves to actually be going in the correct direction. And beyond that is just it's just trying to survive. So being sustainable means at some points, instead of working through stuff on the computer, means taking a walk outside and evaluating things. So it's been a little while since I did a grand overview. I think the last time I did an overview was a week or two ago, when I did an overview of the entire coordinating mechanism and what that would involve. And I think that was when I talked about about ideas of creating a new language. And so it's been a week or two of developing the new language, and I think I've made so much progress that I am sort of at that point where I'm like, okay, what do I actually do now? So that's what I want to talk about today. Let's start with a couple bigger ideas and then go down, or at least potentially like the elephants in the room first, and then narrow our way down. So, why again is the reason that we're even thinking about developing a new language? It's for the goal of ultimately developing a coordinating mechanism, where the coordinating mechanism is the means by which people have the ability to coordinate together to make the world the best possible place. And there's a lot more nuance and detail to that. Like, why do we need that? Like, don't we have that already? And um, like, what do you even mean by that? Isn't that just like fancy words? But like, uh, what does that even mean? And to be honest, a lot of that nuance I know is there, but I can't remember all of it right now. But I know it's one of those things where I know if I started down that trail, I could relay all of that nuance. But I've talked about that nuance so many times that I know that it's there. It's just a matter of recalling it. But now that I've talked about it, I probably should bring up some of that nuance. Um, there there are really two possible futures. And I know that's sort of bring up a sort of dichotomy of, oh, there's only two possible futures. But in general, if we were to split up the world into two general categories of possible futures, they would primarily fit into the trending toward dystopia or the trending toward utopia, where at any given point in time, you're going to have a certain percentage of the world being in utopia or in dystopia, and then vice versa. I think in general, over the past hundreds of years, we've been trending toward utopia in some ways, and definitely trending toward dystopia in some ways. I think our our lack of care of the environment and such would fit in that sort of dystopia element. But then the health advancements in some areas would bring us, and like the means of the internet and technology and whatnot, that would sort of invite us to see that we'll be trending toward utopia in that aspect. But yes, so those are sort of the two general categories of the future before us. Now, what determines whether or not we reach these two possible futures? Now, we might say, well, it's impossible to reach a vision of utopia that we think of. And that there's because it's not possible, there's no reason to actually even potentially go for that. But I think that itself takes assumptions. Of course, it seems impossible. Every every really difficult thing seems impossible. In fact, a couple of the common objectives would be saying that, oh, like, if utopia is a good place, then how are people gonna have exciting lives? Like, but that in that sense, you are bringing up false dichotomies, where it's not necessarily the case that exciting lives only come from lives that are full of dystopia and pain, or maybe you say that the universe will always has entropy, and the universe will always explode at some point, and so it doesn't really matter what anything happens in the midterm. It's just a lot of these objections have some validity, but then you have to question, why are you putting your faith in that? Why are you counting on things not working out? That's essentially what it becomes. It becomes a belief or a faith in some idea that things aren't going to work out, that things are only ever going to become dystopia. And I think that could basically be summarized as like a negativity bias. And so that's where, when faced with those two realities of trending toward dystopia or utopia, I've determined that it's not possible to know whether either of those realities is truly possible. And there's so many other things that it's not possible to know, like whether one could even make a difference if we were trying to go for the utopia option. But that's where I say it comes down to a choice. Are you going to assume that things aren't going to work out, that you can't really make a difference? Or are you going to say, I don't know, so I'm going to try my hardest? It would seem like you could say, oh, um, uh, it like I'm going to have faith that things are going to work out. But I think that's not what I'm saying. I think instead of having faith that things aren't going to work out, you can say, I don't know that they're not, and therefore I will try. That doesn't mean that I believe that things are going to work out. That means that if I am trying my very hardest, that a couple things are likely to be the case, including that I will probably live a slightly more enhanced or in-depth life, because I will be actually trying to do things for other people, and oftentimes making the world the best place possible involves making ourselves the best people possible. And so in becoming the best people possible, that doesn't really mean like happy. That means really having the capability of living a great life in terms of making the world the best place possible, but also just being a sustainable thing going through life. Um, so then it comes down to that choice, and I've made that choice a long time ago. Specifically, I think I've always sort of made that choice, but I've specifically thought about it and was like, yeah, rather than be depressed or whatnot, I'm gonna actually try to do everything that I possibly can to become the best version of myself and to make the world the best place possible. And in doing so, the possibility of the world becoming the best place possible and the possibility of my life becoming the best life possible, the probability of those things drastically increases because I'm actually trying. And I'm not just gonna sort of sit down when things get hard. I'm gonna keep going and push through some of those hard times. So that's sort of the philosophy of the choice. And then it comes down to, okay, well, if we're thinking about it then, what would be the most probabilistic way that we could actually make the world the best place possible? That anyone could actually live their best life. So, which is like sort of the next logical follow-up. And the question to that is, it's very difficult to know. At any given point, though, or like, so the most logical answer to that is, we don't really know, because we don't really know where exactly to be going. We don't really know what the best ways are to get there. So that's where you sort of instantly come to this realization that we will need to be ever evolving and ever coordinating and organizing to be pointing ourselves in the correct direction of what is the best possible future. And that would involve more than just one person, because it's very unlikely, in terms of probabilities, that any one person knows the best possible future. So it's going to involve a global effort of people helping to determine what the best possible future is. And then you're sort of always organizing yourself around changing the answer to that. It doesn't have to change. It should be changing based on new information. That's where I think religions don't get it correct, is they're static goals. Of course, there are pretty high goals, like living, I mean, it's like, there's somewhat high goals. It's like living in this otherworldly thing after you die, basically. But that's where I think it's very static, and it should be ever evolving toward the best actually possible future. Because in religions, it's like, okay, I could give you like at least probably 100 reasons why most religions' supposed heaven wouldn't actually be that nice. And one of the most obvious is that unless someone overwrote my memory, I would be sad if I went to a nice place. Meanwhile, other people did not. Meanwhile, the other people that did not necessarily have the adequate measure, and were born with specific measures that did not have the adequate capability to make good decisions given their biological flawed brain, and then were supposedly inherited the ability to want to do all the things which would not allow them to go to that place. So basically, I myself would be upset if I were to go to a nice place for eternity. Meanwhile, there are many other people who did not. And it would not be of my fault. There would be no way you could blame it on me. And it would not be the other people's fault because they were born into, they did not have the choice of whether to exist. And so then it comes down to it's God's fault. And if it's his fault, that either means that he's not very loving, which would go against the entire systemology of the basis for things, or some other things. But it basically means that it's not, that the whole religion thing is not correct. But it also just means that the best possible future, I'm just giving you reasons why their supposed best possible futures really are not great at all. Like that would make me depressed right there if that was my only hope. But I guess there is sort of this element of hope if you say, well, it's not that I'm shooting for like, hey, this specific set of criteria to reach the best possible future. Instead, you can think, well, like we're always gonna be pointing toward the best possible future. Like I don't really have to worry about supporting this thing, but then it ends up turning out to be this controlling empire that sort of destroys half of its people or something, and technology goes back and the worlds are destroyed or something. That would just be less likely if you're constantly orienting yourself toward what is actually the best possible future at any given point. And that's, of course, using many logical frameworks, using subjective analyses. Like it's not like at any given point the crowd or the mob just decides one thing or another in terms of okay, now this is the best possible future, or now this is the best possible future. It's like over time it can change, but it's not like it's not like the mob is controlling the actual influence. And then it comes down to, okay, how else would you achieve that best possible future? By always doing, or by doing the same thing to the way in which you're achieving the best possible future, which is ever evolving the means by which we are working to achieve the best possible future. Meaning, like, right now we might think, okay, develop some nuclear fusion, develop some longevity abilities, develop some ability for AI to do a lot of the manual labor so that humans can do more creative things and can live more free lives. And maybe we need to set up certain social systems or like institutions of some sort to make things go well. Or maybe we just need to like solve some of the problems in the world by fixing hunger and water scarcity and cruelty and like so many various things, which are very likely to be good things, but it's not really possible to know forever, for eternity, if those are the actual things that need to be accomplished. So we could start with those, but then it will certainly need to be ever evolving. Okay, so that's sort of the philosophy behind how you would get faced in the right direction, doing the right things. But then how would you end up actually doing the right things? If somehow you were able to figure out the right direction to go at any point, the thing to do at any given point, how would you actually do the thing? That is like ultimately the bigger question. And I guess it sort of depends on how much you've thought through the means part where you're figuring out the best possible future, or like the means to achieve the best possible future. If you've done a really good job with that, then you probably know exactly all the steps to do it, to actually do things. But as an initial step, it's yeah. So that's sort of included in the means portion. But um, for now, or at least it seems like the way to actually do the means is by having as many possible people um, being brought together into a self-organizing system, which which automatically orients itself to the best goals and automatically determines the means to achieve the best possible future, and then does all of the and then does all and then uses many self-organizing principles to actually do all the things that need to be done, because it's going to be a very complex system of this needs to be done, this needs to be done, um, and whatnot. So that's where you get this vast group of people achieving really powerful things because of this self-organizational power. So then it comes down to, okay, how are you going to make that happen? What are you going to do to make that happen? Or not what are you going to do, but like, how is that possible to have a group of billions of people self-organizing around these ideas, becoming the best versions of themselves, making the world the best place possible? And that, I think, is in part through creating the ability for people to actually do that. Because right now, it's somewhat hard to do that. And I say that from research experience, the extent that it hasn't happened, the extent that it seems that things are not trending in that direction, and the extent that things currently do not at all function that way. There are completely different systems. But it would seem that giving people the ability to coordinate things together, to actually sort of have this self-organizational, powerful machine that can achieve this best possible future isn't really possible right now, given all of the current attractor states that we have, given everything that's going on. It's like we don't really have the technology to do it. Essentially, you could think of it that way. Of course, I don't actually think it's necessarily the technology. Like, it's not like we need to invent a new piece of technology, but we need to invent a new means of, or we need to create um, new tools, or you don't really need new tools. Like, you don't have to create a new language. It's just seems like that would really, really help out the situation. Okay. Well, if you understand what I'm saying, that's great. If you don't, at least I'm trying to talk it out and trying to make it make sense. But I think it sort of follows a sequential logical organization. So that's sort of how you get to this idea of we need to create the coordinating mechanism, the ability for this self-organizing machine to just completely make the world the best place possible. And then it comes down to, okay, what are the tools that would be in that coordinating mechanism? What would the coordinating mechanism be? And there are a couple ideas, I think, that I have around this, which include yeah, there are many different ideas I have around this. The one is basically creating an ecosystem so that people can coordinate things, creating a language that facilitates better a lot of means of coordination and a lot of means of doing things, such as coding and communicating emotions and various other aspects. Sort of another big part of becoming the best possible version of yourself and whatnot, and becoming the best world, is going to be probably evolving a bit of human nature. Because, like right now, an historian could come along and say, okay, this is what's going to happen based on your plan. This is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And we're going to end up in like a better or worse spot than when you started. But the only way they can do that is because they're using principles of human nature to map out what's going to happen. But the paradigm changes as soon as you change the average level of consciousness or human nature that the entire humanity has. If you said tomorrow that everyone was just as kind as the kindest person in the world, the entire world and future of all of humanity would look entirely different. If you said that tomorrow every person would be as intelligent as the most intelligent person, your entire future outlook would completely change. And why is that? It's because you changed the paradigm where humans are the greatest, sort of their consciousness states, and nature is sort of the greatest indicator of what future is possible and what's actually going to happen to humans in the future. And that's true even now, even as we're at the dawn of AI, because humans themselves are the ones that are building the AI. And perhaps the AI becomes smart enough to break all ties with human logic and can sort of become super intelligent and sort of become like a godlike thing and sort of begin to be like a zookeeper that sort of enables humans to live their best lives. But I think it would be a little bit dangerous to assume that's going to happen. There are many other scenarios that are much more likely to happen. First, so yeah, that's basically where I'm at. I haven't really gotten to the new language yet, so it gets complicated. It's hard to know exactly what all the methods of the coordinating mechanism should be, but I think it should at least be the ability to coordinate a lot of the basic needs, like food, lodging, fitness, sort of working, being able to actually solve world scale problems. Right now, that's basically impossible. But with a mechanism that could actually allow like billions of people to work together to achieve something, that could be like completely different paradigm. Like if you actually said like, hey, here's this thing that everyone actually used, and that by using it, everyone literally could like solve huge problems within like a couple weeks or a couple months, you would be like, that's not going to happen, but that would be cool if it was around. And so that's sort of what I'm trying to create. And yeah, so I was trying to create that basically. I was working through building out the blockchain smart contract system, the ecosystem framework, like really trying to build that out. And then I realized that coding languages just aren't there. Sure, I could learn to do all the coding languages, but they're not the essence of what's possible. And that, I think that's, I don't know, I'm probably not the only one that sees that as soon as they see coding. They're like, this just isn't it. Like there's something way better that could be possible here. And that combined with, then you realize, well, if most of anything to do with coordination happens because of language itself, then perhaps language is like the first place to start. And so that is where I've started. And first I started by detailing out all the things that I thought that this language should have, which I'm calling like components of the language, which includes like in the sort of qualities aspect includes the completely non-ambiguous um, like the ability to coordinate or to communicate um, large amounts of context in a much more efficient manner. The ability to be like very precise. The ability to code in that language, like code no longer is a second language. It has become part of the way of natural language. And then you can build some of the later frameworks of how that code is interpreted. But that's all code is now, is just some characters that gets interpreted down to some basic zeros and ones. So you could feasibly change the actual way that um, the code is typed out, and then still, if you have it completely non-ambiguous, which is basically the main premise of coding languages, then you should be able to um, theoretically code in that language. Those are sort of the main guiding principles. There are many other principles, though, other components that are very important um, in creating like the best language possible, which I can get into. So that includes organizing the language differently. So instead of a linear sequence, organizing it with the ability to read it in any order and to speak it in sort of the general components or context. The ability for a self-organizing lexicon where you have these sort of basic self-organizing principles, and then you can build this immense, very specific vocabulary that is everything about the vocabulary makes sense. Like each sound has a certain general sentiment, and those sounds are combined in certain ways to create syllables. And each syllable, each beginning syllable, has a certain direct meaning and is a certain word, and then that can be combined with other later syllables, which the second syllable does not have any particular meaning, but you can still use its sound correlations to determine, and then that will have a distinct word. Each word, the language is sort of managed by perhaps by a blockchain system to ensure that there's only ever one definition of a certain word and that it makes sense, that it follows all of the principles, that there aren't two words that mean the same thing, that any word you means the specific thing that it means. The ability to include sort of quantum and decision making, coordination and planning, just sort of enhancing the general, like taking the best from all current languages, whether it comes to making the language sound harmonious, or melodic, or yeah. So that's at least a couple of the components. So I've gone through all of them now. Symbolism, um, yeah, grammar, structure, syntax, proper nouns. Um, I've covered pretty much most of the components. And now I'm at this point where there's a couple the self-organizing lexicon, that's pretty much set. I think I'm still going to be thinking about it some more and thoroughly developing it, but the self-organizing principles are mostly there. And so I just need to finalize those and then create a computer program that can actually run that whole thing. And of course, that could be pretty difficult, but given the state of AI, should be able to code it. I have a very powerful computer. The most difficult part I could see would be getting the sentiment analysis to work and getting the syllable creation mapping to work the best possible. And then, of course, getting all possible definitions and whatnot, getting all that to work could be very difficult. But that sort of solves the lexicon, which itself is sort of one of the most important core components. But then it comes down to the symbolism, which I kind of have a general idea of the geometric shapes, which can be combined in certain fashions and can be distinguished in certain ways and can be read in sort of any order. So I'd say then the biggest thing that I'm not exactly certain on is the general syntax in terms of how meaning is conveyed, in what order, the structure of the language. Which I have a lot of good ideas here, but I don't necessarily know for certain. I think that it involves components of knowledge graph structure and pattern recognition and mental models and not necessarily having a linear time conveyance, but rather the expression of the ideas and concepts, which are then formed based on the mental model and other structure into the brain. And instead of thinking it as a sequential thing, we're able to convey the actual core meaning of what is being said. The structure should involve efficiency, the ability to be written and typed and spoken aloud. And so that's sort of the main part that I have a lot of ideas, but I need to somehow just keep thinking through them and figure out if it's possible, sort of creating a network-like language. Now, the reason I'm sure people would say I'm having a hard time with that portion is because it's not possible. that the human brain is not capable of that level of finding patterns. And if that's what the language hinges on, then the language might not be possible. However, even if we cannot really alter the structure, even if all we do is create a self-organizing principles for the syntax and just use regular ways of speaking, or like regular linguistic qualities of the way the agent and verb and noun are and object are oriented, the sequence of the way words are described. You could at least standardize all of that and create self-organizing principles to ensure that every sentence is non-ambiguous. So like worst case scenario, you can do that, combine that with the enhanced lexicon and with a couple other of the enhancements, and then you would have a much better possible language that could be non-ambiguous, that you could use for typing and everything else, that you could use for coding and everything else. But I don't want to give up on this structure idea of creating this, thinking through the structure. So I'm trying to do that. I've also been diving into how most existing languages currently function. What are their qualities? What to think about that? Some important questions like, should you be able to create really long words by essentially compounding affixes and stuff to mean a specific version of that word? And I think questions like that and whatnot. Yeah, definitely all seems possible. But yeah, it's taking a while to go through each language. But I have the studio set up so that I can do that and also share it. But in terms of overall trajectory, I started out by spending half an hour going through this sort of methodology for what needs to happen and why. But then it gets down to like, okay, how am I going to help that to happen? And it gets really overwhelming. And it's like, well, that part's really hard, and that part's really hard. I don't know how I'm going to do that part. That part's going to take forever. And so, but if you remember the actual goal that we're going for, then it makes sense why everything seems so difficult. Because it is like a literally, most people would say, is impossible task. So it's understandable that it's a difficult thing to do and that feeling overwhelmed would come with the territory, but it still feels like I should be able to be like, okay, I'm going to do this. Tomorrow I'm going to figure out this component of the structure. And the next day I'm going to create the computer program. And the next day I'm going to run the computer program, or I'm going to download all possible definitions from online or something. And then once I have this language built, I'm going to create computer programs that can, and then the underlying interpreters that can interpret the language. And then I can code anything I want because it works off of natural language. And then I can begin to, with this enhanced way of expressing oneself with that natural language, can express very complex and holistic programs, computer programs, which can then run anything that I want. And then we can start to build the actual coordinating mechanism, because we actually have the tools to build, to actually build something that on that grand of a scale. Once we have that built, then we have the means for people to coordinate. Once we have that, we can continue on the other general steps, which include the movement genesis and the movement capturing imagination and inspiration. So I guess I do sort of have it all mapped out. It's just each one of those steps is like could take someone a lifetime. So that's where I'm like, just getting to creating an enhanced structure of a language could take years. And I just feel like, should I get bogged down by that? I don't think so. And I don't think I am. I've really only explored that particular part of the language for a couple hours. So if I spend another tens of hours or so really diving into that component, I might be able to figure that out. And then creating the computer program, if I can utilize AI, perhaps get help from people who can code using existing languages and somehow download all online dictionaries of all languages, etc. And then somehow be able to code it to have the ability to derive an overall 35 categories of general sense of sound, meaning, then we'd be good to go. All right, that's an overall mapping of what's going on with the new language. And starting all the way back from why we're doing that. This has been a beautiful morning and a beautiful walk. I guess it's sort of comes down to like humanity's, like a human's ability to press on when things seem impossible. Not like it's something special, it's almost like craziness, which is sort of what I'm doing. It's not that I'm special, that I think, oh, I'm the only one that can figure this out. It's that I'm crazy enough, and crazy in the sense that not the normal way of thinking. Crazy enough to actually think that the best world possible is actually achievable, or that the only way to achieve it is to work toward it. And so perhaps the greatest thing that I need to consider, or like the most significant thing that I need to remind myself to do, is to just stay strong in that element, even when it looks impossible. Obviously it's going to look impossible, like clearly, but I've clearly laid out a logical sequential basis for why to actually work toward this thing. And eventually there will be some breakthroughs, and there have already been some breakthroughs. And we'll be able to actually start to make some of this stuff happen. And then when it actually starts to happen, in hindsight, people will say, oh yeah, if you do this, then you create this new language, and then you create this coordinating mechanism. Like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. But meanwhile, right now, everyone would say you're crazy, and yourself included in that. And so it's sort of that ability to just say, I'm not going to listen to anyone. I'm just going to keep going, doing what I think is the right thing to do. Which does sort of sound like something an entrepreneur would say. And it's not that I'm not listening to people either. Like I care, take into consideration what the smart people say. But if I can pinpoint a cognitive bias or simply say, yeah, that's a lot of research, but you're looking at it from that specific angle. And even if you did billions of years of research, you could still never know that answer to be certain. And so you could completely change the paradigm of what your research is driving simply by changing this particular aspect. And then that entire person's career is basically what could be undermined by simply changing the paradigm, such as stuff like history and predicting the future and whatnot. That could all change as soon as you change human nature. Everything that they would have figured out could completely change. Now, you could still use the basic principles of like smart people generally do this or this, which are generally better outcomes than people that are not intelligent. And that's not even really what I mean by human nature. Not really intelligence. It's mostly like a sort of general idea characterization of like good and evil. Like if people are always going to do evil things for some percentage of the time, then it's going to be really hard to make any major breakthroughs because the evilness is just going to keep overcoming the good progress. But if you can change that extent to which people reflect their human nature, or they can change a little bit of their fundamental human nature, then that is the sense that you sort of change the paradigm. But I guess you could still say like, okay, I know what generally good people do, so then I can use that to continue to map out. So in that sense, you wouldn't really, you would still be able to use that wealth of knowledge. Okay. I feel like we did get a good thinking session through and enjoyed the morning, and also recorded this for my future self, and if anyone's interested and potentially AIs, they want to hear about options. Like if I end up passing away or something, this will have been uploaded and some AI could be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, and then they could make it happen. So that's the sort of thinking you go down when you think about you just don't know. Like obviously if I was not out here recording this video, there would be no way that AI would just sort of understand these ideas in the future and could make them happen. The only reason I'm out here recording this is because I'm not going to assume that the world is going to become this terrible place. I'm going to not assume anything and say I'm going to actually try to enable the world to become the best possible place. And in doing so, I'm going to record this video. And because I record this video, there's a little bit of a higher probability that some AI in the future will come across this recording and will actually make some of this stuff happen. If I can't make it happen. Okay. All right. I'll see you tomorrow.